Tonight, we will hear from Dr. Kate Shafto, who will be cooking with us in the kitchen while talking about eating to support healing. Dr. Shafto is an internal medicine, pediatrics, and integrative medicine physician with Hennepin Healthcare and the U of M's Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. For the last 8 years, she has also been co-teaching an interprofessional culinary and nutrition and food systems course called Food Matters, both at the graduate level and continuing professional education levels through the Bakken Center. Thank you, Dr. Shafto, for being here with us this evening.
My pleasure. It is really an honor, and I wish we could all be together in person, cooking in a kitchen. But this is the best we have, and it's pretty good. So I hope some of you will be joining me. Um, I wanted to start out by just saying a few things about what I plan to share this evening. Kind of three main messages, if you will. I'm not going to do slides because I want to spend the most of the time with the food, but I do have some resources and some slides that I will have sent out after this session. So the first thing I want to just start with is that food is personal. And so by doing this presentation on food for healing as it relates to cancer, it's a topic that's very personal to me. I am a cancer survivor at this point in my life, which I'm very grateful to be, and never thought I would hear myself saying those words. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2022 in the fall and went through various aspects of treatment through the early part of 2023. And I'm thankful that it was caught early, and I'm on the other side of it with kind of a great prognosis, thanks to many things, including my team at Hennepin Healthcare. And I also think of course, my own support system, my family and friends. And then I have a lot to be grateful for in terms of my overall really good health. And food was a huge part of my cancer journey. I looked into and sought advice from an integrative cancer center that I worked with during my treatment to really use food as a part of my healing. And I'm absolutely convinced that it was an important part of my ability to withstand the treatments that I went through, and that it continues to be deeply important to me and very personal to me as I go through the ongoing journey of cancer survivorship. Um, but food is also just personal, independent of cancer. Food is personal because we all have a unique food story and a background that contains food, from our family, from our culture, from our region, from um, the different time in the history of the world that we've grown up in. Then that will be different for all of us. And so I invite you to reflect on your own personal food story and relationship with food as we enter this evening of a little bit of cooking and chatting about food for healing. The second thing I want to offer is that food is powerful. And there is lots of data that I could share about that, and that will be contained largely in the slides that we'll offer as a resource afterward. But the global burden of disease study that was done by the Lancet Journal in 2017, 2019 range named diet and food the number one most powerful indicator or powerful impact on health, as well as death and disability worldwide. Food was the number one biggest influence on those things. And of the top 10, food was at the top, but there were other things on that list that have a lot to do with food. And malnutrition was also one of those things that are like the top 10 causes of death and disability, but also kind of on a continuum, and impact health as well. And so it's very clear, as I've done the teaching that I have, as well as the clinical care over the years, that that nutrition itself is very individual, but some basic principles of nutrition aren't all that complicated. However, our food system is incredibly complicated. And so I'm hoping that tonight, I know we just have an hour together, but within this little time that we can, I can demonstrate, and maybe you'll cook along with me, how we can prepare some very nourishing, pretty simple, and not all that time consuming food that tastes delicious and really supports healing. My last little point is that food is really an amazing vehicle for influencing the amount of inflammation we have going on in our bodies. And I'm confident that anyone here tonight who has been a part of a cancer journey, either personally or with a loved one, is aware of the concept and the feeling, maybe even of inflammation. Inflammation takes lots of different forms, but inflammation is a fundamental part of the physiology or the processes in the body which drive cancer. And it's that chronic systemic inflammation that wears and tears on our immune system and all the other systems in our body. And food habits and dietary patterns are one of the biggest sources, potentially, of chronic inflammation in our society due to a lot of highly processed foods, which are now called ultra processed foods, sugar sweetened beverages, chemicals, pesticides, all these different things in our food system. Again, to my point that the food system is really the more complicated aspect of food these days. Basic nutrition of, whole real foods, vegetables being predominant, lots of plants, good fiber, and limiting those kind of sugar sweetened foods and drinks. That's pretty foundational and not especially novel information, but it's how to navigate that in our food system, which seems to be the greatest challenge for the students that I teach, as well as the patients that I've worked with over the years. So with that, I'm going to start cooking. So I have some things already prepped. And what I had in mind for tonight was a concept that I teach frequently to, again, patients and students, community members alike, which is a build your own bowl concept. So this is super versatile and it can take the form of really kind of anything, just anything at all. But foundationally is a complete meal because it contains usually a starch. In this case tonight, I'm using quinoa, which is a little bit more than just a starch. It is kind of an amazing seed more than a grain, though it functions many times like a grain. It's a complete protein, meaning it has all the essential amino acids that we need in our body that we can't make on our own. We have to obtain from our diet. So quinoa is going to be my foundation of my bowl. And then I have some lentils. Let's see if I can open that with my food view. Yep, I have some lentils that are cooking. And I realized I didn't have any black beans, but I was planning on making kind of a Mexican-inspired bowl. And so I'm going to season my lentils with some chili powder, cumin, some garlic and onions so that the lentils take on a bit more of that sort of Mexican flavor profile. And then I'm going to saute some vegetables, some tomatoes, peppers. I have some greens over here in the side and some purple. Here it is. Yeah, purple Napa cabbage, which is just beautiful. And I'll make a little sauce with some lime juice and honey and olive oil and some other spices, and we'll put it all together. So I'm going to start chopping. So I have the quinoa already made, the lentils are cooking, and I like to start with kind of from the foundation of flavor. So the foundation of flavor being usually things that are in the family of the allium family. That's the garlic, onions, any of the onions, whether it's green onions or bulb onions like this one, leeks. These are wonderful, wonderful sources of antioxidants and also prebiotics, which are important for supporting our gut microbiome. And I suspect most people have heard of the gut microbiome. It's the essential community of microbes living in our intestines and on our skin and in all of our organs, constantly in communication with the brain through what's called the gut-brain axis, constantly in communication with the nervous system, otherwise beyond the brain, and our immune system. So prebiotics support healthy bacteria in our gut. Garlic and onions are some really nice, tasty delicious prebiotic foods, as well as common to pretty much almost every culture, has some form of the allium family in their food traditions. So I was saying the bowl is typically a starch, a protein, a bunch of vegetables, and then usually a sauce that has some good fat flavor to tie it all together. Lacking some cilantro, which would be really perfect in a dish like this, but the seed of cilantro is coriander, and I have some coriander powder that I'm going to put into my seasoning for the lentils and to my sauce. So I like to get things prepped before I start sauteing, because the sauteing in the pan actually goes pretty quickly, and we don't want to just cook and cook and cook things. I mean, unless we want to cook and cook and cook things, but I don't want my peppers to get too soggy. The tomatoes, you can stand to cook down a bit. I like to have some little bowls on hand as I'm cooking, just because then it keeps me organized and keeps my cutting board available. So next, my onion. Oops, that is not my compost bin. There we go. And I also keep a bowl on the counter usually where I can just put my vegetable scraps and compost, so it's available. And Liz, if there are questions that I can speak to as we're going along, feel free to call them out, but I'm not going to be able to monitor the chat.
Sounds good. Feel free to add questions if you'd like. We did have a couple questions that came through if you'd like to answer them now. Otherwise, we can also wait until the end.
I'll see. Let's see what they are, and then I'll let you know if I want to answer them later.
Yeah, so one of them is, are protein shakes helpful when you're hungry, but still, when you're not hungry, but you still need protein?
Okay, good question. So I'm assuming that means like with nausea or other things that can impact appetite during or surrounding treatment. Yeah, they sure could be. I would say this will be a recurring answer to similar questions, would be look at the ingredients. So protein shakes can contain a lot more than just protein. And I would encourage people to, as much as possible, like rely on ingredients that you are in charge of, if possible. I know it's not always possible, but protein shakes and other kind of already made meal replacements like that can sometimes have a lot of artificial sweeteners, preservatives, refined sugars. And though they may be providing protein, they are also providing potentially quite a bit of inflammation, because sugar and artificial sweeteners are very inflammatory. And lots of studies are now coming out to show that to be the case. And so in the setting of nausea and difficulty with appetite, I would encourage ginger, which is a wonderful, potent anti-nausea herb. You can get a root of ginger, chop it up, don't even have to peel it, pour some boiling water over it, let it steep, dilute it if it's too strong for you, but sip on that all day long, warm or cold or anywhere in between, because it is a fantastic anti-nausea remedy and very, very safe. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology recommends ginger, even in a supplement form, for first trimester nausea. So it's that safe that expecting mothers, parents, pregnant people can use that without any danger to the baby. Of course, you would always want to ask your oncologist if you are on medications or chemo actively, but ginger is like incredibly safe. So double check with them, but ginger would be a great way to address the nausea, but then might also help the appetite come back and be a bit more reliable. Another thing that can be sort of homemade protein shakes would be anything with vegetables, because vegetables actually have quite a bit of protein. Lentils also have great protein, any of the beans, greens, tofu. Yeah, lots of plant foods have good protein that would be in more of its whole form and not quite so refined as in the form of a already made powder. Those are some of my thoughts without knowing more of the context on the protein shake question. So this is actually a very high protein meal that I'm putting together here. We've got a lot of different vegetables. Again, vegetables are protein foods, even though that's probably not what most of us grew up thinking were protein foods. Protein foods are anything that has amino acids. That's like the building blocks for protein that get put together by our body to become actual proteins. And so vegetables, legumes, meaning beans and lentils, including soy, nuts and seeds, and of course, eggs, fish, meat, dairy, all of those things we commonly think of as protein containing. All right, so I've got my peppers and onions all set, and I'm going to turn my heat on and get my pan warming up. Are there other questions? Or if people are cooking along, I'd love to know what you're cooking. So the way I like to spice my lentils, you see here in my food view, there we go. I just put some, I rinsed the lentils and then I put them with some water. I didn't even measure. You can always add more water, and you can also drain it off if it's too soupy, but I like it a little bit soupy as I'm starting to make it like refried beans, but it's not beans, it's lentils. So I like to add a little bit of olive oil and then some spices. And then I'll literally mash it up and make it like you could even do this minus the quinoa and do this to make a taco. Chili powder, paprika. What kind of lentils? I am using a green lentil, but any lentil will do. There are probably hundreds of lentils. I don't know, maybe that's an exaggeration. Easily dozens of types of lentils. I recently just discovered that black lentils exist. Had no idea. So fun. And oh goodness, they're tasty. And they cook down to be really soft and just kind of delicious with more of an Indian flavor profile is how I've cooked them, but I bet they'd be delicious with almost anything, or in a soup even. Be really yummy. And yeah, these are pretty quick cooking. Red lentils are the very quickest of the kind of common lentil out there. They cook up pretty quickly, and this time of year, one of my favorite things to do with red lentils is to do a like butternut squash or sweet potato or carrot red lentil soup. So yummy.
We did have a bit of a longer question, so I'll read it while you're cooking.
Sure.
One participant said, I've read about the keto diet for cancer, basically low carbs, particularly processed carbs. What are your recommendations for amount of grams of carbs, protein, and fat to bring down inflammation and lower fasting insulin levels?
That is a very high level question. And I will probably disappoint you in the answer because the grams of carbohydrate, fat, protein, it is not something that is standard for everyone. So I can't really say, but I think the principles that this participant described, in as much as really avoiding the highly refined, other terms would be like high glycemic index foods, highly processed grains, highly processed sugary sweets, that kind of carbohydrate. Really good advice to lower inflammation. And really that the anti-inflammatory effect has, in my mind and experience, more to do with the quality of the food than the ratio of the carbohydrate, protein, and fat. It would be the quality of the fats, the quality of the protein, the source of the protein. Oftentimes, animal proteins tend to be more inflammatory, which is tricky because with the keto diet recommendations, to get enough fat, it relies often pretty heavily on a good amount of animal proteins, animal foods. It's possible to do that only with plants. And I'm not advising one way or the other, just sharing some of my experiences with that challenge, that question. But I can't really give a ratio or percentages because everybody's unique and everyone's metabolism will get to that point of ketosis a bit differently. But quality would be my sort of drumbeat answer to that. So if you can see my lentils, they're kind of stewing up nicely. And I may not even need to mash them that much. Put it closer to the camera. So I did add a little bit of salt. And they're kind of getting that nice, like refried bean sort of texture. So I'm just going to keep those on low back here on the stove. Meanwhile, you can see my peppers and onions. And I wasn't thinking I could have sliced the onions instead of dicing them to look more like my peppers, but I was distracted because we were talking. I was talking. I'm gonna add in my garlic now. I also like to add in some seasoning, like the cumin. I'll grab my cumin seeds as well. A fun thing just to demonstrate. Cumin seeds are really delicious. And these spices are a wonderful element to include in cooking. Any spices and herbs are really they can be powerful sources of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds, and they're just delicious. So explore and experiment with spices and herbs in your cooking.
We had a couple more questions come in. One of them is, I'm hearing a lot recently about avoiding meat, including chicken, pork, or fish and dairy. That I should be not just plant forward, but vegan and vegetarian. Is that true?
Well, once again, this might be disappointing, but I can't answer that for you with all kinds of confidence because I don't know you. And it's really incredibly individual. And I would say, excuse me, it depends on the purpose. So should you be vegan? I would say only if that is in line with your values and your needs nutritionally and your needs like culturally in terms of your food story. It is very challenging to get all of the nutrients we need from a strictly vegan diet. So iron, B12, zinc, those are frequently not, and omega-3. There are plant sources of omega-3, but they are not nearly as potent as the fish or marine sources. So it depends on all those things. And in my opinion, again, my opinion, not knowing the person asking the question, in my opinion, it's really more important to to know where the food comes from so that you can kind of make decisions based on as much information as possible about the food that you're eating. And by that, you can also learn more about the conditions under which animals are raised, because the conditions the animals are raised under, as well as the food that animals are fed, and this goes for fish too, determines a lot about the amount of kind of inflammation potential that exists. One example is that cattle who are fed corn have, again, this has been shown in a number of studies now, that they have more potential for inflammation. That meat has more inflammatory potential than cows that have been pastured, eating what cows have always eaten, grasses, and especially some grasses that tend to contain omega-3 fatty acids like purslane. So when cattle are eating that diet that they are able to digest well, it means that they have lower levels of inflammation in their bodies, and therefore the meat is a lower inflammatory effect in the body of the human consuming that meat. And when cattle are pastured, they also tend to have higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids instead of a high proportion of saturated fat. So that's super detailed, I realize, about some of those technical aspects, but it's an example of how what the animal eats really bearing on the type of fats and kind of the inflammatory potential in that meat.
As a bit of a follow-up to this, this person said that in regards to the vegan question about it, they are trying to avoid a reoccurrence in breast cancer. They're a breast cancer survivor.
Well, I have a lot of personal empathy and compassion for that situation, and I can't offer medical advice, and I don't want to say this is what I did, but I will say that from my understanding of the literature about lowering recurrence risk for breast cancer, a very plant-forward diet is advised, and minimizing saturated fat is another thing that has come from really big population studies, which again can be hard to interpret and translate to the individual. But I wish you all the best with that, and I'm right there with you. So I'm cutting my beautiful, beautiful purple Napa cabbage, adding this into my saute. Colors are one of the best ways to see that there is a lot of anti-inflammatory and healing action going on in our food. So you can see my purple and green and red and the light yellow of the onions. And I'm keeping this moving. It's cooking nicely. Sometimes I like to put a lid on it just for a few minutes to kind of get it steaming. Just have a lid. That way some of the greens can kind of get steamed a bit. And last but not least, I'm going to add a couple of pieces of kale just for even more green. One of my other favorite things to put in a Mexican inspired saute like this is mushrooms. Mushrooms are amazing and have a lot of anti-cancer properties. So adding mushrooms into the diet, always cooked, and a variety of mushrooms. There's popular quote unquote medicinal mushrooms in the way of shiitake and oyster and some of the other little more expensive ones, unfortunately. But crimini, portobello, button, white button mushrooms, all mushrooms are wonderful and delicious, and I love incorporating them into food whenever I can. So This often happens to me. I get a little bit overzealous with my vegetables, and so then my saute pan ends up on the full side, but it's a good problem to have. So I'm going to let this be for a little bit. Just let that kind of steam. And just another cooking note, a culinary tip, is to kind of cook the vegetables until they are just their brightest version of themselves. So maybe I'll try to move my camera a little bit away from the cutting board. Yeah. So you can see these are just so bright and vibrant. My pot holder, don't have a pot holder. Let's see how bright and vibrant those colors are. That means they are kind of at their like, peak, and I don't want them to get too much beyond that. So I'm going to make a sauce really quick here, and then pretty much be ready with my bowl. So you can see that has been, and I've been talking, so I'm somewhat distracted with my cooking, even though I do this a lot. Not that much time to put this together. The quinoa took 18 minutes. So this is something I would hope inspires folks to maybe try at home and try putting together this kind of a bowl from what you have and see how it doesn't have to take that much time. To make a sauce, I usually start with an acid and a fat, in this case, oil. I have an old lime I'm going to use as part of my acid, just because that kind of goes with this flavor profile once again. And I am not really into fancy culinary gadgets. I'm married into this citrus press, and it's probably my favorite culinary gadget, I have to say. But I don't really have any others. As you saw, I chop my garlic. I like doing that. So there's some lime juice, and the other, oops, there's a lot more lime juice, including, now it's an oily lime. And this other part of the lime, squeeze out. Yeah. I'm also going to add a little apple cider vinegar. That brightens things up as well. So I start with about 1 part acid, 1 part oil. I'm fresh out of mustard. So I usually add mustard also because it helps to emulsify, which means to keep things in solution. Oh, there we go. There we go. I'm actually going to bring it here. It's easier to see. So the lime juice and oil, if given enough time, would settle out and not really mix up very well, including that apple cider vinegar I put in there. So to make them combine, instead of mustard, because I don't have any right now, I'm going to use some honey. Honey is a nice balance to the flavors, and it also functions as an emulsifier. So I'm just going to add a bit of honey. I'm also going to add some cumin, some ground cumin, and coriander, that seed of cilantro, just for the sake of having it be that, again, kind of Mexican inspiration. I also have a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. Other examples of this sauce concept could be using some yogurt if you were eating dairy, and that is both an acid and a fat. Plain yogurt works best. You could use other oils and other vinegars, balsamic vinegar, white wine, or rice vinegar. You can even add layers like nut butter or seed butter, like sunflower seed butter, or tahini, which is a sesame seed paste. And those can be really nice flavor as well as texture additions to kind of thicken a sauce or a dressing like this. You could add, if you wanted to make this more along the lines of a salsa, if you had a jar of salsa, you could add some salsa, which would be both acid and kind of that emulsifier or thickening, keeping things in solution. I have made a sauce with avocado where I just kind of mashed and mashed and mashed the avocado, and then I mixed it with some, I think some olive oil and some lime and cilantro, and yeah, so experiment with making sauces. This is so cheap, so easy. Look, there it is. It is basically in solution, a nice little mixed up solution, looks like a dressing. And I plan to put it over my bowl. I haven't tasted it yet, which I encourage anyone making a sauce to do, because you might find that it's too heavy on one or the other ingredients. Mine, I think, needs a little more salt. And that's the beauty of making your own sauce, is that then you can adjust it. There's no such thing as ruining a sauce, because when you're making it yourself, you can keep playing with it until it tastes better. Which is one of the best ways to really learn how to cook, is to kind of taste, adjust, taste, adjust. That is an important food skill, as it's called. All of these are important food skills. And the more we can learn food skills, which, good news, they are things we can learn like any skill, really the more control we're able to have over our own food and the ingredients that we use. And I personally think it's a great way to impact the environment for the better, because cooking at home is a known strategy for reducing our carbon footprint. And cooking the food that we then are about to eat often improves digestion, because our body is connecting with this food in all of our senses. I can feel my mouth watering with just the preparation of this food for the last half hour or so. So those are the components of my bowl. I'm going to put it together so that it looks beautiful. And then, gotta get my bowl. Then we can do a bit more chatting about questions. Okay, so I have my quinoa. Lentils. There's so far quinoa and lentils. Then I have my vegetables. They're so pretty. So, so pretty. Just love that purple Napa cabbage. And then I'm going to see here, even though it's been sitting, it's still basically in solution. So that emulsifier quality of the honey really did a nice job. Swirl it around a little more, and then there we go. You could even top that with avocado, which I don't have, but that would be great here. Some nuts or seeds, like some toasted pumpkin seeds would be delicious on that. And yeah, there's the bowl. So Liz, what do you have? Do I see some other questions coming in?
Yeah, there was one, you had mentioned a homemade protein shake. Do you have ingredients for, or do you have recommendations for ingredients that would go into that?
Yeah, and I would say this kind of a concept would be one way to think about it, as far as complete, kind of a complete meal, meaning all three macronutrients represented: protein, fat, and carbohydrate. So you could do sweet potatoes and some cooked lentils, some rice, some brown rice. You could put some cinnamon in that, and it could be on the sweeter end of things. Like, think of, sweet potatoes with cinnamon and maple sugar, or maple syrup. That's a common sort of twist on not making sweet potatoes more savory, but rather on the sweeter side. Or you could make something like that on a much more savory end of the spectrum with, cumin and some coconut or something. I don't know. You could experiment with it, but I would think about it in terms of principles like a starch, a fat. I guess in that example, I didn't really include a fat. So you could put olive oil into it. You could also, if people are eating dairy, yogurt is a really nice base for a protein shake because it already is protein. Dairy is all three macronutrients in one. And yogurt is a really nice version of dairy because it's fermented. And so some of those sugars and proteins have been digested, if you will, by the bacteria that make milk into yogurt. So yogurt would be a great base, and adding fruit to that. I mean, that's like kind of a classic smoothie. You could also add other seeds. I guess in my sweet potato, rice, lentil, you could add some seeds or nuts or some nut butter. And that could be really like thick and delicious. The yogurt, you could add flax, chia, berries, kind of just, yeah, any of those things. But I would again encourage people to experiment and see what their tastes like, really what your body is looking for, what your body is after when it comes to those particular like needs and situations when sort of a more typical food is not desirable. You could even put ginger in any of those protein shakes, which would help with that kind of calming. And it's not only anti-nausea, it's like pro-digestive, so it helps things move the right direction.
Perfect. That's a great recommendation. Another one we had, do you have recommendations for purchasing high quality spices and herbs, or is there something specific that you would look for?
I would say, yeah, no major recommendations. I would say not to spend a ton of money on them, but I think the brand Frontier is a good, I see that a lot in various places. It seems like it's a pretty reputable brand of spices. I think it's Frontier. And I would say a mixture of spices. So like I love having fresh ginger root. I also have some powdered ginger, powdered cinnamon or ground cinnamon, and I have some cinnamon sticks. And so depending on what I'm cooking, sometimes that more whole form of the spice can be something that like simmers a long time. We made a ton of applesauce because we had a very abundant apple tree this late summer into fall. We made many batches of applesauce and use the cinnamon sticks in the applesauce, and it was just fantastic. In fact, we jarred the applesauce with the cinnamon stick in it, and it was really delicious. I think I saw a comment saying that the food co-ops sell spices in bulk. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. I didn't know what our where our audience is coming from. If you have access to one of the natural food co-ops, which are open to anybody, you don't have to be a member. Those are an excellent source of bulk spices. So you can just buy a little bit and you could test it out and see if you like it. And that's probably where I've seen the Frontier brand is from the co-op bulk section. I try to get my spices in bulk again, wherever it's possible to like reduce single-use packaging, even if it's a glass bottle. I like to try to do that.
A different question. What drugs are currently being recommended to improve appetite?
Oh, I have no idea. I have no idea. I am not up on the latest drugs in the cancer world at all. I am not that kind of doctor. Thankfully, I didn't have that experience or need as a patient. So that would be a question for a different person with different.
Sounds good. We do have a few more that came in. What should we look for in purchased breads beyond just whole wheat flour?
Oh, good question. I love talking about this. So, yeah, it's tricky. So I would say a general rule would be the fewer the ingredients, the better. And ingredients that you kind of recognize as food ingredients, like, baking powder, baking soda, in addition to the flour. There's almost inevitably going to be flour in bread. And I would also recommend finding bread that is kind of more on the whole grain, which gets really complicated because the food manufacturers can use the word whole without the, stay with me here. They can use the word whole without the whole bread being made from whole wheat flour. So they can just put a little bit of whole wheat flour in the bread and still call it whole wheat bread, even if there's other flour and fillers and things that aren't whole wheat bread. So it's kind of, there's a lot of whole words in there, but looking for bread that also has other grains is a great way to support the gut microbiome, because the more different grains and in particular fiber, the more different fibers we have, promotes a really healthy, balanced, diverse gut microbiome. So common other grains that are used in bread could be oat, millet, quinoa. Sometimes these days there's even non-grain breads that include lentils made into a flour and then incorporated into the bread, and seeds like quinoa I mentioned is a seed technically, but sunflower seeds or chia seeds or flax. So getting a diversity of those nutrients and fibers is a really great way to improve the nutritional quality of your bread, kind of get more bang for your buck, so to speak, nutritionally, and not just be kind of exposing your gut and again getting nutrition from just wheat flour, because wheat is, not everybody tolerates it, but wheat is fine, and there's a lot of other grains out there that our bodies can benefit from.
Sounds great. How do you store your ginger root?
Oh, I store it in the fridge. Another way to store it is by chopping it, and then you could freeze it in little containers already chopped if you want to chop a bunch of it at once and then have some for another day. Yeah, but I just store it in the fridge. Mhm.
Perfect. We had one more. Let's see.
Sure.
Find it again. As far as the Bakken Center goes, are there any other health programs that are similar to this that people can look
Oh,
into, or do you have other resources there? If
yeah.
someone wants to learn more?
Oh, great question. Yes, the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing has many, many, many programs. Many are community facing. There are the classes that I teach, the ones that were mentioned. Food Matters is currently for credit for health sciences graduate students, and then for practicing clinicians or health professionals in the continuing professional development world. But my chef colleague Jenny Breen and I are just starting a community facing class that's once a quarter or once a season for University of Minnesota employees. So if that applies to anyone, you could tune in for that. It also qualifies for well-being points. It's called Nourishment for Every Season. So that's an option. And then I would encourage you to reach out through Liz, can get in touch with me. If we have a lot of community demand, we've been talking about it for years about starting something basically like one of our classes, but intended for a community audience instead of a academic audience. And so with enough demand and interest, that it might just tip us over the threshold to be able to do that. But on their website itself, there are a lot of resources about seasonal eating, mindful eating. They probably have an anti-inflammatory eating guide also. I haven't explored the website in a little while, but I know beyond eating, there are also lots of resources on mindfulness and connecting with nature. And there's a part of the website called Taking Charge of Your Health and Well-Being, where you can do kind of your own personal assessment in different domains of well-being, and then set goals and explore more resources. It can kind of be sort of a guide for growing well-being in your life.
Fantastic. I will, after this, we'll go ahead and send out information about it. I'll find the information for nourishment for every season.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So that we
Yeah,
can send
let's
that
do
out to
that.
everyone. And
Sure.
like Dr. Shafto said, if anyone does have interest that's not in the University of Minnesota, please let us know, because I can only bet there's interest out there. You just might not be hearing it vocally. So
Yeah, yeah. And on the note of mindful eating, I would be remiss to not make a plug for mindful eating before we wrap up here. So mindful eating is I don't know, perhaps trendy term for um, I think just a very basic concept or practice of slowing down and pausing and really being present with food and with eating. And this can be done alone with oneself and the food. This can be done in a group with family or community, friends, um, but just really being present with the process of eating, the experience of eating, and engaging all of our senses. And when we do that, we are optimizing our very best digestive potential. So when we are in the moment and we are really present with the food, like we see the food, we smell it, we even hear it. That's another reason I think cooking is so important, is because we hear, see, like you use every sense, literally every sense that we have, and even some intuition in preparing the food. And so our body, mind, spirit is just completely present in this experience of cooking. And then therefore, it helps our digestive system to be really well informed about what is coming to be eaten and then digested. And so seeing, hearing, smelling, feeling, touching, and tasting the food, taking some slow, deep breaths into the belly, into the diaphragm, being really present and just not distracted by TV or phones or reading something. Um, there's a time and a place for that, and I certainly do it too. But I catch myself a lot of the time, and I realize, yeah, I'm not going to feel nearly as satisfied or really enjoy the food nearly as much if I'm distracted by other things. And so I encourage you to experiment with mindful eating and see what a difference it might make in your food experience, even in your experience of hunger. For those of you struggling with nausea, taking some slow, deep breaths, if you can, into your belly activates what's called our rest and digest system, or the parasympathetic nervous system. And that tends to bring down nausea. Not always, but it can be helpful for bringing down nausea, because it really activates the digestive system, which should go in the right direction, meaning, north to south. And nausea is kind of like things are on hold, it's not moving very well, and there's a potential for things to go from south to north. So we want to activate as many things as possible to keep things moving in the right direction. And that slow, deep breath, activating our parasympathetic nervous system, can be support for the digestive system, for healing. It's the place we should spend the majority of our waking hours, and then our sleep. But our world is so crazy and so busy that often we spend a lot of our time in our stress nervous system state, which over time promotes inflammation all on its own.
well, I just want to say thank you so much for being with us today.
My
I
pleasure.
personally learned so much, and
Great.
excited to share this with everyone. If anyone has any questions, feel free to follow up with us. We can reach out to Dr. Shafto and get those to you. And again, if anyone needs the link for next week, we will send that out for next week, along with some of the resources that Dr. Shafto mentioned tonight. So thank you again. I hope
Thank you
everyone has a
all.
wonderful evening.
Glad. Yeah, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes too if there's any final bits or questions.